Welcome to Coming Home. Survive and thrive in homeschooling. Books. So many books and so little time. There are hundreds of thousands of books published every year. How do you choose which books to include in your homeschooling? Really good books, or living books, form the foundation of our educational approach. Therefore, I had to know which book. And how can you tell if a book is a living book or not? For an explanation of a living book, please see my podcast number 7, What is a Charlotte Mason Education? Since we have a limited amount of time in the day and there are so many books, there need to be ways of choosing from the many books available. In our house, there were 2 different types of books: homeschool literature books and books to read in your own time. Most of the books I chose were on Charlotte Mason reading lists, recommendations by fellow homeschoolers, all in pre-internet days. Nowadays, there are Charlotte Mason book lists on the internet, and there are so many books suggested in these resources, you'll never run out. That being said, if you are outside of America, you may want to leave some of their books and find books from your own culture to balance it out. Be careful of recently written books, as there is a general rewriting of history happening in Western cultures. Or maybe the deliberate comparing of eyewitness or close generation historical accounts to recent history books would be an interesting study for your older student. And I had lists such as Taking Smart Pills by Jeff Baldwin. He wrote it in 1996, and I have the printout from 2001. I've kept the list as it was so helpful. I've searched online, but I can't find it. And I'll return to Jeff's Smart Pills list a little later. Once you get a feel for how to choose a good book, you can peruse a library sale or a second-hand bookshop with confidence. I would bring home banana boxes full of books I'd found when libraries were clearing out their old books. There were many gems found in there, and some were returned to op shops or put out in the paper recycle bin. I would choose books that were published before the general date of the 1960s, early 1960s, which indicated that the author was educated pre-World War II, before education was being modernized. Pupils were still taught history, religious studies, handcraft skills, logic, Latin, maybe Greek, good spelling and grammar, impeccable handwriting, and they read the classics with a lot of memorization. They knew how to work addition, subtraction, and multiplication in their heads, and they could do it fast. The standards were high, even though many left school at an early age. An author educated thus could write with an extensive range of expressive vocabulary, a knowledge of history, otherwise known as a broad education. And this seemed to be normal. For example, Sir Edmund Hillary went to high school, but not university. He was a beekeeper with a passion for climbing, not an academic. His writing style shows the educational standards of the time. He was born in 1919. Compare his autobiography, Nothing Venture, Nothing Win, and its breadth and depth of vocabulary and expression with most modern authors, and you can see how books written in an earlier time can help educate you and your child. It can take time to learn to understand the more challenging content of a classic novel or style of an author. Persevering brings the reward of familiarity of an author's style and a growth in your child's intellectual ability. For older children, learning how Jane Austen, C.S. Lewis, or G.K. Chesterton writes results in a pleasant familiarity of an author and an increased flow of reading capability. It becomes less effort and more enjoyment, And once you know Charles Dickens was paid by the word, you can laugh together and enjoy his verbose chapter titles and descriptions in his writings. There were many times when an assigned literature book was started with a sigh and resignation. Then as the days go by, the book would be picked up again by choice and read in her own time. I remember finding a daughter reading Far from the Madding Crowd on her bed in her own time. I also remember feeling satisfied that it was so, and how lucky she was to enjoy such a classic. I would look for books to teach about previous eras with their old ways, particular values, customs, dress, class system, and a country's history, such as Lorna Doone. Young children need to be supervised, choosing their own personal reading books, and you choose their literature books. As the child grows in discernment, he can learn to choose his own books for personal reading. Throughout a high school student's education, you will still have to be responsible for good choices. How you and your older child choose the literature books is up to you to figure out, but as the parent, you are responsible for ensuring any book chosen by your older child still is a premium choice for his education. You can select a bundle to choose from. For our youngest, when I had the courage to use no science text until her mid-teens, I rounded up all the science-based books we had, and that was quite a pile, and that was her pile of science literature. Over the years it included Gerald Durrell, James Herriot, H. Rider Haggard, and books on birds, cats, fish, botany, inventors, anything science. Some in her pile were modern, but they had to pass my criteria of being written by one passionate, well-educated author and not a panel of contributing writers, which is actually a brief explanation of what a living book is. Most modern books were left out of school time selections, and they might have been included in the child's private reading time. Now, there is an importance in knowing about a story, and I'm thinking of examples such as the very popular Harry Potter and the Berenstain Bears, and how to tell what twaddle is. So for Harry Potter, I first read that book when it came out, and I knew that our older children were going to pick up on the hype and the excitement that was around, and they would want to read it. I wanted to know what it was about. It had good hooks, but I don't think it will ever be literature. Will it still be a bestseller in 100 years, or in the history books as the most popular book of its time? Some objected to the wizardry as the reason for not letting their children read it, but for us that was too obvious. Look behind that and see the breaking of rules to justify the outcome. Children who assume they know more than their professors. These are plot themes to notice and talk about with your children. When is it right to break rules? And how can you tell? How likely is it a child can make a wiser decision than an adult? These themes are vital to discuss as they are absorbed into the child's value system like osmosis. The Berenstain Bears. Watch out for the mocking of the father. It's not a good idea to undermine the role of a father. Read Thomas Sowell for an assessment of where this has got our society. Read them selectively by all means, but talk about the subtle but obvious father mocking. The Honey Hunt is my favourite Berenstain Bears book, but oh my, it laughs at the father all the way through. So read, but don't assume their neutrality. Some parents don't allow their children to read these, and fair enough, they're the parent. However, our approach was that when it's age appropriate, use these to help teach discernment. I would rather that they learn this at our knees than coming across it unprepared and not knowing how to process it. And twaddle. What is twaddle? It's silliness, a book with no particular purpose or unnecessary moralizing, telling instead of showing. Once you know what a good book is, you can spot twaddle at 10 paces. Once the appetite has been trained for quality writing, your child will become more discerning. It's like once you've tasted quality chocolate, it's unlikely that you will prefer the cheap stuff. Except on occasion. I remember reading a famous 5 novel after finishing some exams. It was like literary junk food, and it was bliss. Have I read all the books our children read? No. Did I pre-read many? Well, not really. It would take so much time. Many I would just take on their reputation, recommendations, and merits earned over the years. Although I didn't realize the original fairy stories were often more brutal than what the modern interpretations present, my daughter read the unabridged Cinderella, and the ugly sister chopped off her toes to fit in Cinderella's dropped shoe, and I had no idea. So, lesson learned by the mother: assume nothing in children's books. Once a mind has been trained in basic classics, a young teen may be ready for Shakespeare, Milton, Homer, or Dante. At least a taste to expose him to it. Maybe it will lead to an interest in the classics. Well-educated modern writers still regularly refer to the classics, as their writings still have something to say to us. An old-style book with a boring cover is still one I will pick up to peruse. Never judge a book by its cover is especially true when dismissing boring older covers. And the reverse applies too, with flashy modern graphics and little intellectual content therein. An example would be, a couple of weeks ago I popped into our local op shop and a mum had brought in 2 shopping bags full of their old books. And just because I'm used to peering at old books, I had a little look in the bags. There were big piles of books in there, and on the top were a couple of old style books. You know, from the covers you can see that the pictures are in an old-fashioned font and there's a limited amount of colour on the books, just dead giveaways for old-fashioned books. That was all I needed. It didn't matter to me what were underneath those other old-style books. I just picked up those 2 bags, I went up to the front, and that dear lady charged me $5 for the 2 bags. And I knew I could sort through them when I got home and sort them out as to which ones I would keep and which ones would go back. Now, reading these books for me, the classics with my children, over the years developed my mind in a way that I didn't expect when we embarked on homeschooling. It was a bonus, an unexpected bonus. They gave me knowledge, increased my vocabulary, and helped make me more articulate than I would have been. And now I'm going to return to taking smart pills. Jeff Baldwin writes in his article, Taking Smart Pills, I know it sounds corny, and I wish I could think of another way to say it, but reading is like taking smart pills. Need more wisdom to make it in college? Pop a Tolkien pill in your brain. And I mean, reading worthwhile books makes you smarter. He wrote a list of his 10 most favourite books that he recommends everybody should read during their lifetime. He actually ends up sneaking 21 titles into the list, and he knows that there are many more. He says to please keep taking your smart pills. Now, if you would like a copy of this list of the books that he's recommended, by all means try and search it on the internet. I tried, as I mentioned, I cannot find it. I am happy to send you a copy. Contact me below in the YouTube comments area and I'll see what I can do about getting something to you. All right, keep taking those smart pills. Now, one more thing. Adults grown on these books make excellent team members for a pub quiz. Bye-bye for now.